Good afternoon, this is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Tuesday, March 18th, 2025. It is 3:07 PM. And we are back to talk a little bit about what we were putting on our priorities lists, what we observed, and just have a general conversation about this for a little bit, see where we need to go, if people have questions about what they need to do in their own portfolios at this point. And then I'll be also talking to the speaker later this afternoon about things as well. But it looks like people are starting to really hone in on where they need clarification and what they need done. So that's a good thing. So I'm working off the 2-page list, and I saw Dave looking at me. Dave, I'm putting you on the spot. Do you have any comments you want to, thoughts you want to say?
This is the 2-pager, the one we just got a little front and back, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, I was going through it. I was trying to see what, any consistently, some things popped up, and I started to track primary care, FQHC, and Dale long-term care as 3 that started to repeat on tier 1 and tier 2. And then I realized I started to add what those add up to. And in my own work, I didn't, I submitted a number of reductions.
Yeah.
I think if you add all these together, it would exceed what I came up with. So I was starting to think, well, okay, that's what they came up with, but I don't know if there's enough offsets.
Right.
That's not our exercise right now.
Right now, it isn't. We have done work, all of us, to do some offsets, and I'm just going to kind of take that for the moment.
Okay.
Take a look at that, because I got a lot. I probably got the most.
Those were the 3. There were some other ones, I think, too, but
Yeah,
in my eyes, because that's kind of my portfolio.
sure.
I know it more, so I was looking for that, but others might have seen it differently.
Okay. Other observations, comments, Wayne?
I took the 2 pages and pasted all of them together so that I could rank them like that, and then started color coding them the ones that,
Oh, look at you. Did you change your priorities?
well, I just looking at to see where we had consistency in priorities. And you're right, Dave, there's one that seems primary care funding seems to be at this point in time the most. And there's, I think it's one.
Primary care
one,
and
two, three, four.
FQHCs.
I got 5 out of the 11 concurring on that one. That's the most. And then childcare for infant toddlers are 3, but I haven't had time to look at all of them. But to look at all of them, you could rank them that way if you want to, at least it would be a good exercise to rank them that way to see how they ranked from top to bottom. It may not be the way you want to do it, but if you did that, at least you'd know.
Right.
But it's going to take a little bit more time to look it up.
Yeah. All right.
If we had it in a spread, if I'd had it in a spreadsheet, I could have done sorted.
Yes.
It would have been done.
Right now, we're looking at the individuals, but we can, and we can do a little bit of going through to see what we see. Other observations? Anybody, Mike?
I inadvertently didn't put an amount into something when I sent my piece to Maria, so I didn't see it on the list. So can I share?
Yes, go ahead. Where are you?
Well, Building Bright Futures had requested 2 positions.
Okay. Were they on one of these pages and just without a number? Maria, do you see?
So, what I got sent this morning was in response to yesterday's spreadsheet, the 3 boxes, they base appropriations the one time and a list of reductions.
Okay, so you didn't get the priorities, the first 5 and the second 5 priorities.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay,
But
yeah, so it looks like we've got 9 people's priorities on here. Not 11. Do you have 10? Or maybe I have the wrong sheet. Oh, wrong sheet. I was looking at an older version. Jim?
So, my question on terms of the priority list, some items are listed which were the governor's recommend.
Right.
So I'm wondering if we can just, I mean, that would be part of the conversation if we're reducing anything. So, but I didn't look at
Right.
those as
New,
adding,
right,
although it may be important to keep for some people, and I get that. But, in terms of additions, I don't really need to know for this exercise that we wanted to.
right. And I actually saw some reductions on another sheet that weren't anything that was from the governor's recommend. So for example, I think somebody said, let's reduce the Secretary of State's 1.5 million voter guide. Well, it's not in the governor's recommend, so that's not a reduction.
Right, right. You may not.
Right.
add.
So if there's something that's a priority that's on here that's already in the governor's budget, then we don't need to do anything with it necessarily. Tom?
Yeah, so I think the first kind of process question or issue that I had with this of doing 5 and 5 is that this didn't recreate the box that we're supposed to be playing in. So, you know, and so the I mean, I look in the box, I can obviously identify my two tiers, you know, but for instance, you know, where the numbers might be off, have an interplay with what
gets cut.
what lasts in BAA versus, I mean, and I'm thinking directly for the Human Rights Commission, I don't know what the outcome of
That's
the
right.
BAA plus, we gotta carry the BA, we gotta carry 2 positions, plus they still need X number of, you know, so
Right.
there's an, you know, there's, I mean, I made my cuts,
Yeah.
but then these priorities weren't based on expanding the spending per se. So it's a little weird.
Yeah.
You know, it's and because 10, you know, I mean, I tried to cut enough money so that I could have 20.
Yeah. I had more than the 10 that were in here too. I had many more than that on the original one.
On
And
the
it was
plus side,
also
I
helpful to go back and say, we still only know we have a finite amount of money we're going to be able to cut from what the proposal is. And so what, if I had to pick, what's really the most important stuff I want to be sure happens. So, Jim?
The amounts, especially some of the larger asks, in my view, can be flexible.
Yeah.
Like it might be half of what was
Right.
recommended for a particular area. So I think at this stage, it might be more productive to find that list of areas that we agree on, that we are open to adding. And then until we figure out where we can agree, which is going to be hard probably, where we are willing to reduce the governor's budget, then we know the boxes. So that way, I mean, for example, there's a $5 million request for, I think, my federally qualified health center,
Yeah.
right? So if we agree on what we can reduce, then we know, if we do that 5 million, maybe we can't do something
Right.
else. And maybe that has to be 3 million and add instead of 5 million. I'm just saying that as an example.
Right.
To representative.
I'm gonna follow up this.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the hard parts that, you know, again, I'm gonna speak for someone who hasn't been through this process before, but the hard part is saying, well, if somebody's, not just anybody, but if somebody's saying the FQHCs need $5 million in order to get through the year, what does $3 million get them? You know, I mean, that's the kind of thinking of saying,
Good
like,
point, yeah.
there's pieces where you're like, you know.
Maybe have to be all or nothing on something.
And I know that I know that there's conversations like, you know, I have a conversation about the business.
Yeah.
The international business funds, like, well, now is more important than, it's like, it may be true, you know, and so what
No, it
happens
is.
when you say,
Right.
I'm gonna only offer 25 or 30 or 50%.
Yeah.
It may
Right.
not do any good at all.
Right. That's fair.
Right, well, that's the questions we're gonna ask, and so some of the things that I think happened over the weekend is, I was asking people, can we do 750 for the tech hub instead of $1 million? Can we do half of whatever, is it, you know, some things are all or nothing, and some things are not. And so those are questions that you can be asking of this. And I don't know the answer to that, but I do know, and we're basically not having more testimony coming in here, we've done that. So now we have to go and do our research and ask questions. And I know as I've been looking at the FQHC and the primary care, we know our healthcare is in grave danger, very fragile. We know one care is going away and that there are primary care folks who depended on one care and could also go under with that going away. So there's some questions. So I'm going to go back and talk to the chair of healthcare and the former chair of healthcare and say, just explain to me again, now that we're down here, what if we did this? What if we did that? So I'm going to try to dig a little deeper in some of those. And so we may need to do that with some of these things.
Yeah, I think some of the proposals that we've seen, those are estimates to one's best ability with what we've been receiving here. So like the primary care, gap, there's going to be a
Right.
gap there. Is it what we're looking at or is it larger?
Right. What can we really
What,
live with and what, can so because we don't have.
I'm
a
not sure change that request, but
Yeah, exactly.
something along those
What-
lines.
What can we do that will, keep people afloat? We don't want to do so little that it doesn't no good at all. So there's that balance that we have to figure out. And some things were done unscientifically when we had housing and community development in here about the infrastructure bond bank. We said, how'd you come up with 9.1 million? That was what was left. So there was not a lot of science in that. It wasn't that that's really what it costs and we have these projects and we know how we're going to spend it. So those are the kind of nitty gritty things we need to be asking. Are you really going to spend all this money next year? You put in for this, but do we really have the projects lined up or the whatever, that kind of thing?
And is there money that may not show up in a project, just their balance of operations, just that carry forward.
Right. Well, and we found out with the previous bill that they can probably fund the position
Right.
in cannabis. So the question we might ask there is that something we want to do knowing it'll be in the budget the following year?
Right, because
It's okay for next.
recruiting and filling a couple of positions that
Right.
we know they need, but maybe not now.
Right, got it. So Tom?
No, sorry, I was stretching my hand.
Oh, okay. It looked the same as the question.
Sorry.
It just could have been that urge for the endless question,
Yeah.
so maybe I'll.
Well, there are. One of the other ones that, a lot of us had on here was the 40,000 for empty arms. And very often the little ones at the end, when we sort of have defined the box, they fit in very nicely to even things out. So I'm less worried about having conversations about some of those because somehow those, I'm not promising anything, but those are not the.
2-on-1's a similar thing, and the transport
Deputies,
yeah.
yeah, that was listed a lot. Oh, and pre-charge,
Mhm.
And in the case of the 40,000, there's also like the art council for 68,000, that's like,
the Arts
it
Council.
matches.
Yeah.
It's a match,
Right.
so we're not cutting, if we don't fund it, we don't cut them 68,000, cut them $1 million, so it's just a question of.
Right.
But getting back to the earlier, is there a way list each of the various items on here and then mark off how many they're mentioned? I mean, yes.
That's what I'm doing over here.
They were mine.
Me too.
Yeah, but I don't know that that's actually, that matters as much.
Well, it's,
Well, it does kind of
It
matter.
does, because
I know at the end of the day, we have to sort of figure out, making some compromises, but, I mean, the FQHC, looking at it quickly is mentioned a lot.
Right.
Particularly sheets.
Right.
But there's others that are a couple here and there, and
right,
it still may end up in there.
right.
Because it's very important to a few people, so, but.
Right, or they fit in with some other thing that's going on.
primary care is 7 out of 10.
What's that?
Primary care is listed 7 out of 10 times.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
And did you look at just the tier 1 column or?
I'm
You have to look at
coloring
both
You have to look at both.
I'm
Okay.
treating them as if they're the same.
Right.
I get it. Okay.
And there's some other ones, multiple ones, and some that don't appear, I think we got some that will only appear in one person's.
Right.
And that's gonna happen. We're all look at things differently. So,
Exactly. You know, home share, there were some positions that showed up a few different times.
Plus, there are different kinds of investments, you know, there are kind of emergency investments, there are the kind of short, small things that somebody was just referring to, the empty arms that, you know, can make a huge difference. 211, actually making that sure that that's operational all year, at the rate that, and then there are kind of structural, you know, supports. And I'm trying to, in my mind, think about, so can I address those different needs? And then there's the future, right? And how are we investing in the future versus just putting our finger in the dike? And so there are just all these, they're kind of different things that a budget usually reflects. That a mix of those things. And so that's part of what I think my recommendations were shaped by. And I think that once we, you know, look at a lot of these things, even if we came up with lots of votes for certain things, they all may be in the same kind of category. And we may need to step back and look at, well, what aren't we funding then? And are we comfortable with that, given all the things that are?
May I,
Yes, Dave, go ahead.
Tiff just said something like, what aren't we funding? And I'm surprised it didn't rise up in the committee rankings as much and then get in our giant sheets.
Yeah,
But the designated agencies, when I say that, I don't know if everybody knows what I mean, but you know, your local community mental health center. Teresa said yesterday, there's roughly 4,000 Vermonters on this developmental waiver throughout the state. And the vast majority are in basically what you might call a foster care home. Though we don't call them foster care. Many of their caregivers are aging out. The spectrum of the 4,000 are, I'm going to be graphic because it's the truth, so forgive me, are some folks sadly who will smear feces on the wall if you don't watch them closely enough, to others who have a low IQ, they're adorable, you want to hug them every time you walk by them, and they'll giggle while the TV's on. You know, they're not that challenging to care for, but it's a broad range. There, and this is the part that troubles me. There's, and it's nobody's fault. Federal government has said, states, you have to have conflict-free case management. Vermont's the last state. Vermont held out long as possible. And Vermont's doing it because it has to at a cost of 8.6 million. One of the contractors they're hiring, they're starting to recruit in anticipation, hiring 100 case managers at $20,000 a year more than the existing staff who are what we call service coordinators, who do it all. You know, if Dave's caregiver has a heart attack and is in the ER and Dave's home alone, service coordinator's in there that night. I mean, it's a fragile but very important network. Those folks are the folks who for only 1 out of 9 years got a governor's recommend for an inflation increase, and this body has tried in the past to help them out with increases. And they're not even on the table. So I think it's pretty sobering, and I'm not saying our process is our process. I'm not just.
no, I understand.
It happened. I mean, it came to a policy committee. I mean, they're not here.
Right.
And that's hard to take.
It is hard. We have given them increases each of the last 3 years.
Yeah.
So
Understood.
at least we have done that.
Done what we could.
And all that money that, you know, that we had, we are definitely living in a different world. And you've been on this committee, Dave, before I was on this committee, and you know what that's like.
Mhm.
You've been on it on both sides.
Let me ask a clarification. When you say they're not on here, is that
They show up once.
What I mean, is the requested increase not in here, or is there nothing in the budget for that? I mean,
Well, they're listed as rate increase for HCBS,
yeah,
comma, and Maria might jump in there, and then it says including DS. So that was it. It's kind of, and you could easily, when you see HCBS, some people, oh, that's Choices for Care, home and community-based services, or, oh, that's part of the home health, et cetera. But it wasn't designated agencies rate increase, like FQHC rate increase. So it was kind of, and that's the way it came to us from the policy committee. It's not how they framed it.
Right.
and I only ask because
Yeah.
Going back to lunch, when I talked to you about hearing from the people in Brattleboro.
Yes, Julie, that's her world.
Well, and we've talked to the folks in healthcare and other places and we heard what their priorities were. And this year, the priorities are different than they may have been last year. too.
Well, there are some people who serve the state. I mean, DAs and SSAs are state. I mean, they're doing the work that the state would otherwise have to do, right? And state workers every year get a pay increase. There are other people in various systems. They get a regular pay increase. We don't do that with DAs and SSAs and, or long-term care. And there is language that the Human Services Committee submitted that asks specifically that next year's budgets come in with figures that relate to, the cost of a 1% increase in those rates, so that it's in the budget process. It's right. It's not something that a committee has to add. It's not required to be budgeted, but it is there for everybody to see. It's a step forward. I do think that there is a way in which we need to have a consistent approach to providers upon whom we depend. And that's, I think should be one of our goals for next year.
And yes, a consistent approach in this new normal. This isn't the old norm. This isn't the old new normal, right? This is prior to COVID, we budgeted this way. We called it austerity budgeting because we picked a number size of a box and that's what we had. And we had these same conversations, I'm sure, in this committee about, well, we can only fund this much.
Right.
Right. That's what we're having. Then we had COVID, which was a massive hit to our society, period. And the federal government printed dollars in order for us to care for and to actually budget to need. Right. So we covered needs that always existed. So a DA or an SSA employee or Medicaid things that the Human Services Committee over the last couple of years, I mean, they had a 79% reimbursement rate increase. And it's like, yeah, and it's still less than what they need in order to run a business. So we've done that. What we haven't, I don't feel we've done successfully, is prepare for a year like this, where we're back down to using Vermont taxpayer dollars, federal matches that occurred as a right of business. And now, we're going through this process and we're going to finish our work on Friday night, and we're not going to know. And I don't think you ever know, right? Because then it goes over to the Senate and then they have different ideas, and April 15th comes and different amounts of money come in, and we see, so we see certain pieces of this in a different way. And then this year, I'm sorry to bring up the federal stuff, but sort of Damocles over all of this work. We are like, I can't even begin to understand what may happen as things happen. I've heard from the Department of Agriculture about a $1.75 million hit, which in agriculture is a lot of money for giving out to farmers. It is luckily not going to affect any of the school programs that we're aware of this year in terms of bringing food to children who need it. But it's a representative of, they have another program that's been frozen where we are losing money to staff time of being reimbursed. So it's really frustrating to say that we need, and I'm not criticizing or denigrating this desire for a system that's better than what we have. I'm not sure we'll ever have that. But it's just a really hard conversation to take, this is a really hard conversation to live with, as I'm sure it always is in appropriations. When we don't know, that we may get a telegram or an email in May saying you're $400 million in the hole.
That's right.
And so it almost is, and yet the people who are served by, I mean, that's our struggle. But the people who are served by these programs, and we're about to make a decision on what's a sufficient amount of money to give them and who may be shorted. I mean, Representative Rubin, I appreciate, if you don't have 211, then you don't have a beginning of a foundation for access to these systems that may or may not exist anymore. So I'm just like,
Yeah.
this is where, if I were drinking here now, that I would be.
I would be, if I could.
It's water. But it is very difficult to, not just sort out the requests from what people want, but what we know in our hearts, because we went through 4 years of COVID-based funding of what people need in this state, to understand that we are consistently underfunding people because we're not raising the revenue where we can afford to raise the revenue to pay for things that we need. So we're back to, I just want to make sure we all know, we're going back to a number and people are going to suffer because of that. And that's our burden that we share, but it's brutal.
Yeah, it is, this is the hard time. So, any other thoughts for right now?
But
Yeah, Jim, go ahead.
can we get back to,
Yeah, do you have other observations you want to
I
share?
guess there are some obviously that are mentioned multiple times. And
Yes.
I don't know if Wayne wants to take on with you, or if you want to hunt it back to Maria, or if you just want to do it individually. And I know some people, some issues could only be listed twice, but we still include them because they're really important after we talk about it. But I think it'd be easier to funnel it down if we had that count, like this item is mentioned 7 times, or this
Mhm.
one's mentioned,
So I will ask Maria, is there any easy way to do this without manually counting everything?
Let me
You want to think about that?
Yeah.
Not entirely, it's not gonna- even if you sorted it, it wouldn't be exactly right, because,
It would be close.
well, the problem is, in some
Sort it
places,
alphabetically, but
The naming is.
yeah,
we're
but
gonna probably all use the same.
somebody used different things, like food, somebody put food bank, someplace got the Vermont ET food bank. So if you sorted it, it's not gonna sort right. And I'm sort of.
Well, you could sort it and then just go back and do a second sort after you figure it out.
But I'm willing to continue with this and do them all and add them up, and then you can Xerox these, everybody can check them to
Mhm.
make sure the numbers are the same. But, or you could do the same thing, or you could have, try to sort them. But you're gonna have to go through them.
Well, if you sort them alphabetical,
That's a
you
start.
get some of them.
Yep.
And then you go down manually where you can get the names, and you can sort of plug them into, I don't know, that may not be.
Yeah, that would be the simplest, how I would do it if I was on my computer at home.
Right,
Yeah, we
well,
don't
we
have the
wanted, we
spreadsheet.
don't have the time, it sort of needs to be today, so
Yeah,
Lynn, and then
doing-
it looks like Mike maybe had his question.
I've been doing the same thing that Wayne's doing, and I've got a list of them,
Okay,
and,
good,
and some of them are repeated, obviously more, and then there's a bunch that are clumped up together,
right,
and there's some that's only one time,
yeah,
sometimes. I mean, the problem is, and I think Tiff has sort of addressed this a little bit, there's some stuff that you really should need to do, even if not everybody wanted
Right.
does that.
right,
And there's some times that are mentioned that you could easily find other ways.
right. So we, let me try to be clear about this. We're gonna be as democratic as we can. And in the end, I'm gonna probably present you with something to look, for us to look at.
Okay.
And everybody gets a chance to make their case. I mean, maybe something's on there only once. But Dave speaks so eloquently about it, we all get sucked in and say, of course, we're gonna do that. Do you know what I mean? Right, so we will continue to have the conversation, but my goal is to try to present an option for us to be discussing that's more specific tomorrow.
I think that's perfectly fine here. We kind of restricted ourselves to put 5 things in one box and another, kind of like over the weekend, we.
Exactly.
Give us this number here.
Yeah.
Knowing that all of us in this room sit down, okay, like, is this number 6 or should it be number 5? And they're not, one isn't any less important than the other here. And we've gone through a process here, kind of, at least in pencil, closing some things off, looking at the
Right.
report, right? So what's beyond that we need to make sure that we do take
Yeah.
care of, above and beyond what's on the web report,
Right.
it's the governor's right. The best we can. We don't have a lot of time here. I
We
agree.
don't, and so this is now we're gonna make some decisions. And Mike, did you have a comment? Yes.
No, it's just a brief point of clarity, because this is what Lynn and I were discussing a few minutes before we went live, which is there are just a few areas that I wonder, I just want to make sure we're clear on. There's primary care funding gap and transition from one care. And based on some of the dollar amounts on those, there's a couple lines that I'm not sure if everybody's.
Right.
So I just want to make
know that,
sure.
yeah, the dollar amount that you could link it back to that, or the committee letter had a dollar amount possibly.
I guess it just, if we get to that discussion, I think we're just gonna have to be
Figure
careful,
out.
because some of those read close to each other.
Yes, and is it-
on-
yeah.
on-
What do we really mean? Yes, yes, we will, that's part of what we'll need to sort.
Some people may have changed the dollar value. If it was a-
Yes.
Yeah, on
Oh,
purpose.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so in a minute, we will go off live. We'll continue to do our looking in our county, and I'll see if Maria can, if there's any way she can assist us in this. I want to, it's almost 4:00. To go, check your texts, check your emails. We're hoping to hear something about the budget adjustment in the next 20 minutes. But it would be for tomorrow morning, so I will be running around, so that at the moment, we're gonna plan on doing that maybe at 9 o'clock or 9:30 or something like that in the morning. I don't know for sure that we're gonna be ready by then, but I want to just warn you that that may be what we do. Sometime tomorrow morning, we need to get that done. And this is that, we'll have to be flexible time, right? Here we are again. But you have everybody around, we can all talk to each other and talk
And you want us
about.
all to carry our phones with
And
us.
carry your phone to make sure the batteries, that it's on, yeah. Okay, so I don't know what time we'll start tomorrow morning. We'll assume 9 o'clock. Unless you hear otherwise.
I could be here at 7 if that works.
I have a meeting at 8, so anyway. So let's.